This is a Socialist News and Views special interview.
I'm Nick Schillingford, coming to you from the Urban Cabin Studios in South Minneapolis with this special interview. How's it going?
Not bad, not bad.
So on Socialist News and Views, we let folks introduce themselves. Do you want to just tell the audience who you are?
Sure. I'm Robbie Orr. I'm a writer who currently living in Tulsa, but I lived in Twin Cities for 50 years and been involved in a variety of different activist organizations. Currently, I'm a member of the Democratic Socialists of America.
I am as well. I joined not too long ago. I'm not super active in them. I'm kind of doing my own thing for the most part, but I am officially a member as of a couple of months ago. I was up in Duluth, Minnesota, and they were up there. I was watching a film screen or something, and it's like they're everywhere, so I should just be involved. And then when they say, "Are you a member?" I can say yes, and we'll see what that gets me. But you put out this great book this year, Crashing into America, Radical Passage from India. Really great writing. I'd love for folks to get a sense of the writing in the book. I don't know if you have any sections you like to read. I thought maybe part 3, chapter 1, that starts on page 110. It's just over 4 pages, like, I don't know, it's like 20 paragraphs or something like that. But I don't know, you think that would be okay to read?
Yeah, I actually didn't get a chance. I looked at your questions and put some ideas together, but 110, yes.
Yeah, you want to?
Yeah, sure. So the book's broken into parts and chapters about my life. I was born and raised in India, and then as a missionary kid, Scottish and American parents, and then the pattern there, we went to an American missionary school, and then when you graduated from high school, was a boarding school, crazy. There's a lot of stuff about that in the book, but when you were growing up, you were really confused. What
Right.
were we, are we Americans? Are we Indian? Because we felt like Indians.
Right.
But we lived in a kind of privileged age, the end of colonialism. And so the book's broken into sections. Part 3 is called Jamie Moore's 115th Nightmare. It's kind of based on a Dylan song, and it's about arriving in America. Chapter 1, Ahab's America. The waves that rushed across the Bay of Bengal were poised to sweep us off our Green Mountain refuge. We lived in a boarding school, was way up in the hills in southern India. Those waves would slam us against the concrete and glass walls of airports worldwide, alone and confused. We, the children of foreigners, born into the womb of Mother India, had grown together, sheltered and wild, nurtured by that ancient culture. We Cody kids grew up in hills covered with elephant grass and jungle sholas, filled with rhododendron trees, towering underbrush, thick with bamboo and wild schefflera. We lived vicariously off the rock and roll, rhythm and blues, and the images and news coming out of the US of A. But our presence in India was a remnant of the decaying British Raj, which had welcomed and encouraged the sizable American missionary population. After independence, India began sloughing off American missionaries, but it took decades before they were all gone. Despite our origins, we were still part of India in 1970. Our parents played essential roles in hospitals, colleges, and schools across India, and their children were part of the package. But the radical 60s changed the missionary kids. Sustained by spicy sambar and dosa, inspired by Gandhi, Eldridge Cleaver, and Sri Aurobindo, we were stoned and beetled till the crying winds of Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison blew the smoldering teenage embers of sex and rebellion into open flames. Nourished with mutton curry, egg parathas, rich South Indian coffee, tobacco, ganja, and occasional hashish, we learned American history from a Canadian and Indian history from an Englishwoman. We grew up without TV, but we read Marshall McLuhan. Within and without the 60s, we were Americans who weren't from America. We were desperate to leave the restrictive rules of our missionary school, but scared of going home. We knew it meant the end of the world as we knew it. During our last weeks, my girlfriend Rachel and I would be under a spreading eucalyptus tree, smoke cigarettes, and make out, sharing our dreams of joining the revolution while looking up at the starry South Indian sky. The world was spinning out of control as we watched, yet we couldn't wait to get off our isolated little mountain and be a part of the new American Revolution. Then, 2 weeks before we graduated, came the shocking news: 4 dead in Ohio, and 2 more in Jackson State. College students who had been protesting were shot and killed by the National Guard and State Patrol. No fucking way. What was happening in America? The news came in brief articles in the Indian Express. A week later, Time magazine arrived. Rachel and I were the first to read it. The cover picture was a color photo of a student kneeling beside her dying friend. We read it right before our AP American history class. It was hard to concentrate in class. That night, new dreams stalked me. I was running up a slippery temple steps next to a muddy jungle river. Every step I grew taller and wider. My legs grew heavier as a crocodile came closer and closer until I'd wake with a start, sweating and breathing hard. Or I'd dream of hiding in a pitch darkness with friends and as a madman hunted us. When he appeared, I would open my mouth to scream a warning to my friends, but my voice froze deep in my throat. Or I would fly over jungles that looked like India in a helicopter, and would have a gun on my hand and a helmet on my head. Then the chopper would explode as I awoke. I did not share these dreams with Rachel, Raghu, or Charlie. We just got high and listened to music. America by Simon and Garfunkel was our theme song for graduation week. We were all poised to go looking for whatever America was. The week was one long stone night in the woods of Kodaikanal in the hills of South India. Only graduation day stood out. Exuberant and triumphant, the class of 70 wore new clothes as we marched into the school gym. I wore a red raw silk jacket. Rachel wore a red silk dress that stopped 6 inches above her knee, well above the school's limit. Mickey and I gave a humorous class history and then broke into a speech condemning racism at the school. Mickey's band played a cover of "We Got to Get Out of This Place" by the Animals. And we marched across the stage decorated with a giant peace sign as our grim-faced principal, a Naval Reserve lieutenant, handed out our diplomas. Then one final night in our mountain paradise or prison, sleepless and stoned, a group of us walked across the Bund. The dark black lake reflected a full moon so close we could have touched it. We climbed over a wall in the Coimbatore Raja's compound. The compound was deserted, so we explored the Raja's garden in the moonlight, forsaking the safety of the woods. The group wandered around paths through rose bushes and flowering trees lit by the full moon. The moon lit up the big house, and we smoked on the veranda. Wandering around the back, we discovered a full-size cricket pitch. We played an imaginary game of cricket until we got bored. We lay on the pitch and looked at the tropical moon to which we were saying goodbye. Couples gradually snuck into the long, dark shadows of towering eucalyptus trees, making the last night of our final night together count. As the eastern sky lightened, we all walked to Coker's Walk to watch the sun rise above the faraway Bay of Bengal. We caught the rare sight of the first flash of gold-red sun on the distant water. Then it was time to walk away from a world we could never return to. Rachel's mom had a taxi booked for 9 a.m. We walked into the Carlton Hotel at 8:55. Rachel's mom insisted we sit down and have breakfast. The cab could wait. The English breakfast of eggs, grilled tomatoes, baked beans, toast, and even bangers. The sausages I'd so often dreamed of all tasted like sawdust. The old jagged stone that first appeared the night my father got me into boarding school grew sharp and cold in my stomach. I felt like I was 9 again, walking away from everything I loved and into a hard unknown. Rachel's mom finished her coffee. Time to go or we will miss our flight from Madurai. I didn't even know you could fly out of the ancient city of Madurai. She and I followed her mother, but ducked into a hallway for one final flashing kiss. Then she was gone. I walked home alone. We would leave the next day for our little town of Sangli, so I could say goodbye to my hometown, and the servants and school staff could say goodbye to me, the Sahib's son. Then Bombay and the world.
Yeah, let's leave it there.
All right.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. That's a great it's a great reading. And I think you already kind of alluded to this, I think in your introduction, but it's number one, there's a lot of specific detail in there. I remember one of the few creative writing courses I took, and how this particular professor was always hammering away at specific detail, and we had to go through and put specific detail into stories, and I noticed a lot of that in there as you were reading. Now it's a fictional book, but as you mentioned in the intro, and I got this impression throughout the book, significant parts of that are autobiographical.
Yeah.
Can you discuss that specifically, how similar or different Jamie Moore is to you, and how you went about putting the characters in there, and what making a fiction out of autobiographical material was like?
Sure. Most of the events I experienced, many of them are elaborated on. Jamie Moore and myself are pretty similar, except that he was much more adventurous, shall I say, romantically. I was totally shy and sort of thought I was unpleasant or unattractive, but I was just so scared of girls. And partly that was my very Christian upbringing that another writer explained it in a very good way, that sex, or church told us that God loved you, and the dirtiest thing in the world was sex, and you had to save it for someone you loved. So it's that kind of trauma. But
oh yeah,
but so that's really kind of the difference between Jamie and I. But what I was trying to do in this book as an overview was how I and many of my generation got radicalized. And this book is sort of actually more politicized. To me, a radical is somebody who's devoted to fundamentally changing the world and committed to it. Politicized is becoming aware. And so I try to trace how external events, history going on around you, for me, it was decolonization of India. I was born 4 years after independence, but it was still a colonized country. It takes a long time for that kind of oppression to wear off in the culture. And so, as white Europeans, we were a privileged minority and were treated as rich people all over, even though my parents didn't have much money. But it was political events, friends, especially close friends, and romantic relationships where you kind of really explore who you are, especially as you're coming of age. And then, of course, the culture and events like Vietnam War, the fact that we were all heading for the draft, and rock and roll. Rock and roll was a big part of
rock and
my
roll is
life
a big
in
part of
this
this book for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I like the short sections and chapters. You know, I have ADHD, and I feel like the last book I was reading, I was like, oh man, this chapter is still going on. It's still going on, and I really liked how the short chapters, you know, really, you know, it flowed well, and it felt like, you know, the ideas were encapsulated in that chapter, but it really felt good to have those separate sections. As far as the process, this is kind of a follow up question to the last one. You know, as far as the process, was it? I mean, is this stuff you'd been writing down for years as you went along and you'd kind of been writing it, or did you kind of sit down one day and say, I want to write, you know, the story of my life, let's get going? Or is it something you worked on for, how did that come to pass? Is that, or a little of both?
A lot of both.
Sure.
I started writing in 91, right after I got out of this secretive communist group I was in, the co-op organization.
Sure, yeah.
Called it the organization. And it was very cult-like. I'd gone into it, I wanted to be a writer, and the leader of it one time, he told me, you young white kids, everyone wants to be a writer, but you got nothing to write about. I was like, oh. And I sort of put that whole thing aside for years. So it was, I started writing a novel back then. I pretty much wrote the first draft of one. And it wasn't really based on my life taking place in Africa. It was more abstracted, but had a lot of the same elements of getting radicalized in college and dealing with the revolutionary organization and the trauma in it. But my writing teacher at the Loft had told me, it's like, what's really selling these days is memoirs. You've got a very marketable life. You ought to write a memoir. And I got stuck. I just could not do it, you know. So then anyway, long story short, eventually I started writing about America as I was traveling around in doing audits. I'm a computer security guy. I got into computer security as a way to make money when revolution hadn't happened in
right.
time.
Yeah. You need money. You need the money the rest of that time, don't you? Yeah, I know it's
money. You need money to live in this society. And so it just kind of grew from there. But at one point, it just flowed out when I started getting into this stuff. Now I've got very noisy dogs. Do you hear them?
No, I don't actually. So it's cutting out that noise. Good.
If they do bother me, I can just go in another room. Bother you, they bother me. But so then it just kind of flowed out, and the characters just sort of took over themselves, you know.
Well, you definitely had things to write about. Your cult leader was wrong. There's a lot of good stuff in here, and I think it was right to move it to a more similar setting to your actual experiences, again, to get that specific detail in there, and to really it does feel, it feels like a memoir, but also I like it. I like the way that it comes together like that. with a memoir, but again, like you said, but a little bit more maybe, or, a little bit more success with, with the girls and other stuff at the school and this kind of stuff, to make it, to give it that shape. And then I understand, from reading the end of the book, you've got two more books. I believe one is coming out, supposed to be coming out next year, and then the one after that is kind of vague as far as when that'll be pulled together. What are those? What are those two? Where do those two books come into the story?
Well, the next book is called On the Road Through Maggie's Farm, or The Making of a Revolutionary. And that's really kind of how I moved from being a politicized anti-war student to making a commitment, and that it follows. I'd gone to, and Jamie goes to Costa Rica for a semester abroad program from Grinnell College.
Yeah, there you go. You got your hat. Yeah.
He sort of runs across a student radical group that's very serious. They're aligned with the Sandinistas in next door Nicaragua. And they basically, through a number of kind of interesting stumbling events, he gets recruited by them to essentially investigate his own student program, and finds out that part of it, that they were providing, the students were being researchers for American corporations and also for the CIA annual yearbook. They would do questionnaires and research directed by the political science guy. And through that experience, Jamie was very much radicalized, sort of realized revolution's a very serious process, and it's not something you just do part-time. You've got to really commit your life to it. And he has a lover down there, a Sandinista, and is broken up because she chooses to go back to Nicaragua to work with the revolution rather than stay with him. But he also learns from that experience, gets back to the States, and is kind of floored at the lack of activism in January of 72. And that's when, no, it was 73 that the AIM thing happened. But anyway, he's kind of floundering around until one day in April 72, when the bombing of, there was like just this incredibly terrorist bombing of North Vietnam and Haiphong and Hanoi. And Haiphong was the port in North Vietnam where all sorts of Russian ships were there trying to provide weapons for the Vietnamese. And we were very much afraid that if they hit a Russian ship, they would start World War III. And anyway, I ran to the campus, Grinnell College, and thought there'd be big protests, but nobody was doing anything. And so there's a scene in the book where I'm just sitting there, and three or four people walk up, and I know one of them, and we start talking about what we can do. And we had no idea how could a handful of students stop the war if, the rest of the people were just smoking dope, playing frisbee.
Right.
And then we ended up, okay, we're just going to have a hunger fast. And we went to the dinner lines, developed a pamphlet, and said, we don't know what to do, but we're really upset about the bombing. Please come join us. And by the time we picked up our sleeping bags, we were going to stay in the chapel for the length of the hunger fast. And we got there, and the college was packed, or the chapel was packed with 700 or 800 people.
Wow.
And they were all kind of looking to us for direction.
Right.
And we were like, But sort of out of that, I sort of realized that, just ordinary people, and that's what people always are, and people who pushed the civil rights movement were ordinary students. Um, we eulogize King and make him into a saint, but no, he was an ordinary person, extraordinary person, but
Mhm.
most of us are just ordinary people, and he couldn't have done nothing without the thousands, hundreds of thousands of activists
Absolutely.
were radicalized. And then it kind of goes through becoming a full-time or a fully committed Marxist-Leninist and what's going on with the so-called new communist movement in the mid 70s. And it was very confusing because every year or so, even less than a year, the different groups would split into
Yeah,
different
right.
factions, and there'd be all these polemical arguments. And so the book ends up with Jamie and his activist friends had started a newspaper, and they were decided they were going to live in Iowa, have a commune, and continue organizing. Well, they end up splitting kind of as a metaphor, but it really did happen. What
Right.
was happening with the larger movement. And that's the end of book two. Then book three is about the CO and how Jamie arrives and hears about the co-op movement and kind of gets involved. And
And so that opens in Minneapolis, St. Paul, 70 fall
yeah,
74, and that
and
and that one we
follows
have to
him
and
in
that
and
one we
out
have
of
to
the,
wait that one we have to wait for
oh,
because it's we're gonna have to we're gonna that's gonna be the one where we have the tension builds and then we have to wait for
I guess so, because
it. That's all right.
the first two, I kind of wrote everything all the way through and then decided I was going to split it into two. And so I wrote the first and the second part sort of through Grinnell College and worked on that for, I don't know, since 2011 is when
Sure.
I wrote that. And so the next one won't be as long because I took a long time to learn a lot. I did like 16, 20 revisions, and I had good editors. I had a lot of people read it and give me feedback, and because it's really hard to
Oh yeah.
write on your own. And so
No, definitely.
but what will probably come out sooner is I'm working with other ex-members of the CO trying to summarize our experience. And so it will probably get a book out that's more of a factual
Sure.
history, people's stories. Um, and then I need to retire soon so I can have
Right.
more time for writing and
Full-time
acting.
writing, yeah. Well, your book has a lot. I mean, I have some things in common. My my dad's mother uh was born in India.
Oh,
My dad was born in the UK. I was born in the UK. My mom's from Wisconsin. So we moved to New Zealand when I was little, like two and a half or something, and then we lived there for a couple of years, and then I've been in the Midwest ever since.
okay.
So there's kind of some similar things that I could relate to in there. Never really, even though I came here when I was like four and a half, I feel like I never quite fully integrated into American society, maybe the same way that somebody who's born here was. But of course, if I go back to England, everybody thinks I'm a Yank,
Yeah.
so to speak. So it's like, you don't really fit anywhere. And I really like too that you had a call to action at the end of the book. I don't see a lot of those in books and fiction, especially. It's very welcome. Um, I don't know. Do you have a call to action? For the audience right now. Everybody's feeling confused and upset, right? It's not a
Mhm.
great time. And, you're talking about ways to repair our broken world, as you say. What should people be doing right now, in your opinion?
I mean, On a grand scale, I have no idea.
Right.
I mean, I still believe we need to move towards socialism, in my mind, a democratic socialism, which is a bit of a redundancy because socialism is a democratic system of the economy as well as politics. And the Soviets, and in my mind, the Chinese as well, have kind of distorted it and made it a very authoritarian system. But I think part of that, I've been studying recently this guy named István Mészáros. He's a Hungarian philosopher that died recently,
Oh.
but he says, and I think that's what we were starting to do, is that you have to build like a socialist metabolism, social metabolism before overthrowing capitalism. You can't wait, because if you just overthrow the state and kill all the capitalists like the Russians did, or capitalists or czarists, old ways are going to creep back in, and the domination, subordination will get reinforced. So we were trying to break that down but break down the racism, the heterosexual, hierarchy, patriarchy, class attitudes. But we tried to do it divorced from changing the world. I think you have to just engage whatever issue really motivates you, whether it's climate change or police brutality or whatever it is, labor organizing. But as you're doing it, make sure you're open to changing your mind, to looking at your own white supremacy or male supremacy or whatever, and attempts, because it comes out not necessarily in theory, it comes out in ways where we try to make ourselves over somebody else. I'm more dominant than you, and that comes in every organization I've been in, whether it's a school or a church or a political organization. There's that kind of conflict, and what we got to do is do real stuff like organize a union, but within that, challenge those tendencies of hierarchy to be reproduced, and challenge them within ourselves. And
I agree.
We got to show each other love and mutual respect.
People bring a lot of ego to the whole organizing space, and also I think the idea that there's two sides to an argument, when really there's probably like seven infinite number of sides to an argument, or different gradients of different ways that you can look at things and come to agreement. So I think that's super helpful. You also encourage people to reach out to you potentially just to engage in discussion. Before you go, is there anything else you want to say? Anything else you want to plug, or do you want to let folks know where to find you, or how to reach out to you, how to get a copy of the book? And
sure. Right now the main way is Robbie Orr Writes at gmail.com. Unfortunately, I don't have my website up yet.
Sure.
Just got too many things going on, but I really love engaging in discussion, and otherwise just, DSA is a good organization. You're putting together a union at your workplace, challenging the genocidal war in Israel.
I agree. Well, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Appreciate what you do, Nick. It's very important to get stories out. Thank you so much.
And that's our special interview. Thanks for listening. Solidarity.
This has been a Socialist News and Views special interview.